Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, the New York Times publishes an editorial with the headline, "America has a marijuana problem." False claims, misinformation, and manipulated facts right out of the Sam Prohibitionist website. Veteran Jason Ambrosino posts a LinkedIn blog exposing the spin on those facts. Plus, the FDA misses a presidential deadline of February 9th to start with regulations over the rescheduling of cannabis. So now what? More delays and inaction. The U.S. government is shut down and dysfunctional right now. And that didn't stop President Trump from pardoning 5 former NFL players who were found guilty of crimes over the past decade, from perjury to sales of 175 pounds of cannabis. Plus, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine knows all about whining and now calls out the cannabis advocates in his state. One of them is Tim Johnson. We'll get his reaction.
The problem with marijuana or cannabis in the U.S. is that we have failed to regulate it properly to the benefit of communities, to the benefit of patients, consumers, and just through regulation.
Plus, a state committee in Oregon passes a THC cap on products, causing serious backlash from the industry, including our own Marianne Kersagi from Alibi.
It creates a rule that says that every edible must be individually packaged at no more than 10 milligrams per package.
All of our state reports plus our international segment on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCMTV's weekly news on the battle to end cannabis prohibition in the United States and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. It's been quite a week in the fight to end cannabis prohibition, with prohibitionists emboldened by the inaction by the FDA for missing a regulatory deadline imposed by the president, to an upsetting editorial by the New York Times that claims America has a marijuana problem. Keep in mind, this is the same publication that wrote an editorial 12 years ago calling for the legalization of the plant medicine. This time around, the Times resurrected some of the favorite claims about the dangers of this plant medicine when used irresponsibly. It started with references to their own call for legalization in 2014. Quote, "This editorial board has long supported marijuana legalization. In 2014, we published a 6-part series that compared the federal marijuana ban to alcohol prohibition and argued for repeal. Much of what we wrote then holds up, but not all of it does." Unquote. That editorial continues, ripping advocates then who predicted legalization would bring few downsides, and the Times editorial even gets defensive about their past position. They claim now that marijuana addiction is rampant and that use has increased. Of course, use has increased. It's legal in half of the states in the United States, so there is more available to be used. Then the editorial admitted they were wrong about how the plant was perceived 12 years ago. Rather than go over the rest of the editorial that made another dozen claims without much evidence, another target of the editorial was so-called big weed, who are incentivized to mislead the public about what they are selling. Unquote. The Times did not go into how they were doing that, since regulations in every state won't allow any positive messaging about the plant. Social media censors information and hides behind their community guidelines by shadow banning or outright deleting pro-cannabis companies' pages. It also takes aim at President Trump for his executive order to reschedule the plant. The editorial claims that multi-state operators will benefit the most from eliminating the 280E tax code. Of course it will. That group of businesses are spending the most money to fight the injustice of not allowing baking or regular tax write-offs like every other business in this country. That policy remains one of the largest barriers to overcome for everyone in the business. Here's another quote from that editorial. "Marijuana companies, not casual smokers, are the biggest winners of Mr. Trump's decision to reclassify the drug from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The change will increase the profits of these businesses by causing the tax code to treat them more favorably." Unquote. How about allowing the tax code to treat the industry like every other business in America? That would be fair and just, as opposed to vilifying the entire industry just for being in the cannabis business. Executive producer of this news show, Jimmy Young, talked with Tim Johnson from Ohio, a longtime advocate, lobbyist, law enforcement, and military veteran from Cannabis Safety First.
Do you think there is a problem with cannabis or marijuana in America right now?
I'm not sure what the problem would be, but I guess understanding what they perceive it to be would probably be on a pejorative side, something that's bad about it. But what I see is the problem with marijuana or cannabis in the U.S. is that we have failed to regulate it properly to the benefit of communities, to the benefit of patients, consumers, and just through regulation and so forth. So I'm not going to say that America has a problem. We have a problem with learning how to control
Right.
the cannabis that we have here in this country now that it's out and it's about.
Right. And it's educating the people that are making the decisions and the lawmakers which has created any issue more than anything else. And there's still so much more to be done. And it's probably, well, right now, when you look at where we're at, the prohibitionists seem to be making far more noise than the advocates right now. The advocates kind of are sitting back and saying, hey, it's here. We got it, man. I think the fight has to begin again against what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been doing this for 10 years now at our state house, and all of a sudden I've seen a total switch of legislators that have come in. There's a lot that are still pro-cannabis, but there's still a lot that are prohibitionist. And I think that's the problem. And yeah, advocates got a little lax. They relaxed, and now we've seen a lot of the states that have legalized medical, adult choice, and so forth now have lawmakers, legislators, other activist groups and so forth fighting against us and now wanting to criminalize everything and overregulate everything.
That entire interview will be available on demand on the WPCMTV.com website and released on our YouTube channel on Thursday. There's plenty more national news this week, including President Trump's new drug czar, Sarah Carter, issued pardons to 5 former NFL players for past nonviolent crimes related to cannabis, some for perjury, insurance fraud, and some for drug trafficking. She even pardoned a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame named Joe Klecko, who played for the Jets. Other players included former Cowboy Nate Newton, former Ravens running back Jamal Lewis, and Travis Henry, another running back who played for 3 different teams over a 7-year NFL career. Carter posted this quote on X. As football reminds us, excellence is built on grit, grace, and the courage to rise again. So is our nation, unquote. And now we start our state reports in Virginia with Joe Parsons, who is watching that state's legislature trying to come up with a fair adult use law that is expected to pass this year when Virginia becomes the 25th adult use legal state. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. With many states making the transition to adult use sales, Virginia is trying to not replicate some of the mistakes that were made by other states. Case in point, the bill that advanced last week to set up the regulated adult use market has had amendments added by the chair that add harsher penalties for illegal cannabis sales, buying from someone without a retail license, and the one that I feel is most important, underage possession. Senate Majority Leader Scott Survell is the committee chair. He has argued that the cannabis-related crimes should align with alcohol. He also went on to say that without those penalties, there would be no incentive for people to utilize the legal market. Under the old bills, illegal sales were only a Class 2 misdemeanor. Now they would be a Class 1 and carry up to a year of jail time. The same would apply to buying from someone without a retail license. And under the old bill, underage possession was only a $25 fine. And really, what incentive would a $25 fine do to deter underage use? As an activist, I've always been working to free the plant and fight for free and fair reform. However, we must be responsible and keep the bad actors from taking advantage of the progress that we've made to achieve this reform. If we want a fair and safe marketplace, then people should follow the rules, the same with alcohol. And the people that take advantage or violate these rules should have to face the same consequences as the alcohol industry. Not only do I agree, but the Senate committee did as well. and has advanced this bill with the new amendments. That's great news to report on for this week. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One more note from Washington, D.C. Back on December 18th of last year, you might remember President Trump's ceremony for his executive order to start the process of rescheduling cannabis off Schedule 1. At that time, he gave the FDA a deadline of February 9th to submit regulations and a list of cannabinoids that would be on that list. Well, that deadline came and went this past week, and once again, the FDA did nothing. This is the same governmental agency that Congress appointed to regulate the new federal legal definition of hemp in the 2018 Farm Bill. They did nothing then, and now, 8 years later, the FDA is doing nothing again. So what are the consequences when you don't do what your boss wants you to do? Do you remember NBC's show, The Apprentice?
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
At least the president has some experience with this. Well, now let's check in on the nation's #1 cannabis market, California, where the world's largest dispensary, Planet 13, is pulling out. Here's Dina Nagib with that story.
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week, the Planet 13 exit from California was on display as Catalyst Cannabis took over the massive store in Santa Ana, which announced it was closing last November. Planet 13 opened in Santa Ana almost 5 years ago with a lot of fanfare and over-the-top design features, such as an interactive wall of TV screens and a giant octopus statue. Catalyst CEO Elliot Lewis predicted that the store would fail shortly after it opened, and now has opened one of his stores in its place, adding to his growing list of retail locations. In other news, a report from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife was released last week that highlighted thousands of cannabis-related environmental violations, citing impacts to waterways, wildlife habitats, and public lands, mostly due to illegal cannabis cultivation. There were violations found on the legal side, but illegal grows were more often involved in unauthorized water use, banned pesticides, and abandoned infrastructure. Many of these issues are on federal land, and with less funding, cleanup is also a problem. But California's Cannabis Restoration Grant Program is working to address the issue. Before I go, I want to mention Hall of Flowers Ventura is coming up March 18th and 19th. I'll be reporting on site with interviews and insights. See everyone in Ventura next month. That's it for California news this week. I'm Dina Nagib from Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
You have to give credit to the cannabis reform movement in New Hampshire. Despite multiple attempts to expand their fledgling medical program for an adult use legal market, the Live Free or Die state is Republican controlled, and once again, another attempt has died. The New Hampshire Senate Judiciary Committee voted 2-1 along party lines to kill a House-approved adult use legalization law. Even if it had passed, their new governor, Kelly Ayotte, is on record saying she would veto a bill if it came to her desk. So once again, another governor rejects the will of the people who voted her into office. A recent poll in that state concluded that 70% of New Hampshire residents want legalization, including 55% of Republicans in that state. Another state where a sitting governor is becoming a prohibitionist is Oklahoma. That's where Governor Kevin Stitt announced during his State of the State address that he wants to shut down the existing medical program in his state. Kimmie Cannabis was pretty upset about that development in her backyard, and she's back this week in Oklahoma with reaction from outside the Oklahoma State House.
I am Kimmie Cannabis, and I am live at the Oklahoma State Capitol, where we have a new party trying to emerge, and they support cannabis. So I had to come down and learn more about them.
We're hosting this cannabis event because In the last week's State of the State address, Governor Kevin Stitt stated several statements like he believed that all cannabis stores were merely fronts for illegal cartel activity and illegal human trafficking. As anyone that's worked inside of the industry will tell you, that is objectively false. It requires background checks, certifications, and even authorizations and a whole legal team to even get a dispensary off the ground. And that's not even starting to talk about the workers that work inside of them going through background checks and getting credentialing themselves. I'm sure you can find bad actors in every industry, but that'd be like shutting down Walmart because the corner grocery store is selling to underage minors.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense, and it makes no rationalization to take a whole industry and throw a baby out with the bathwater. What we're here today to do is to say that we stand with medical, legal cannabis in this state as a relief for patients like our veterans that are finding brand new ways to deal with their traumas and their issues, as well as people like our MS and arthritic patients that are finding ways to get through their days with dignity, or even people with their children who traditional pharmaceuticals have just absolutely left behind. We want to be here to support cannabis growers, industry workers, and people that just want to find relief in this industry.
The state of this industry is at stake. We can't, as a community, keep swallowing camels and gagging on gnats. Who child welfare taking their children and now taking the children of women who are medical patients. The judicial system, corruption that leads to folks getting cases in the first place based on prosecutorial misconduct and all of the reasons our broken criminal justice system is. Those are just two examples.
That's a wrap from the Oklahoma State Capitol, where the conversations around medical cannabis, patient rights, and government overreach is heating up. After speaking with former Senator Connie Johnson and Ezra Marshall of the Sooner State Party, one thing is clear. Oklahomans are not backing down when it comes to protecting access, jobs, and our freedom. I am Kimmie Cannabis from Canna Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
In the Southwest, the state of Nevada continues to see prices falling and the legacy market growing toward pre-legalization revenues. Here's Dina Tasaka with the Southwest Cannabis Report.
I'm Dina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis Ex America, and this is the Southwest Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona dispensaries are issuing a voluntary recall on select marijuana products after possible fungal contamination was detected. According to KYMA, the affected products are Super Yuzu from Legacy & Company and Trap Queen from Nature's Wonder. The concern involves Aspergillus, a fungus that can trigger allergic reactions or infections, especially in people with pre-existing health conditions. No illnesses have been reported so far. Consumers who purchase these products, particularly those with underlying conditions, are advised not to use them and to dispose of them. Anyone experiencing symptoms after use should contact a healthcare provider immediately. Las Vegas is stepping up enforcement against deceptive, counterfeit cannabis signage, with Tick Sigerbloom leading the charge. Clark County is preparing a new ordinance that would ban stores from using marijuana-style branding that confuses tourists and customers. Sigerbloom is clear. You can't put a big green cannabis leaf in your window or use labels and language that make products sound like real marijuana if you're not a licensed dispensary. Officials say many smoke shops are selling intoxicating hemp-derived products without proper testing or regulation. Products containing THC outside licensed stores would be illegal, and violators could risk losing their business licenses. As previously reported, more than 30% of Nevada's cannabis market is estimated to be illegal, cutting into regulated sales and school tax funding, reinforcing the only licensed, only legal message from the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. That's it for the Southwest Highlights. I'm Dina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis Ex America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Oregon this week, a proposal was debated in the Senate that would set a limit to the amount of THC in edibles. Like so many states with legal adult use cannabis, there is an increase in accidental intake by children under 5 years old. The law that is being discussed is adopted by 13 other legal states. In those states, accidental dosing incidents have decreased. Of course, if parents would lock their edibles up, lawmakers wouldn't have to set these limits. But this is what happens when parents can't control access to their stash. Our correspondent in Oregon, Marianne Kersagi, is on a steering committee in that state that lobbies on behalf of the industry. Executive producer Jimmy Young caught up with Marianne in New York City, where she is expanding the products from her Alibi brand.
Thanks, Alaina. Hey, joining us now, not with an Oregon report, but with an Oregon thought and reaction to a news item. We all know Marianne from Alibi in Oregon has been with us for many years, and I so appreciate your work, Marianne. You know that, right?
Of course, it's so much fun to be here. Thanks, Jimmy.
And thank you for joining us, because the news item that I'm really concerned about is what the committee in the Oregon Congress, Oregon House, State House, whatever, passed was limiting edible THC per unit to 10 milligrams. Now, everybody knows one of the things our elected leaders continue to do is try to control the amount of THC in products. They can't even figure out where to put the products or what they're doing with it. But limiting it to 10 milligrams of THC, how does that impact your business, and where does it stand right now? Not just your business, but this issue.
Yeah, it doesn't impact us directly because supposedly this proposal is just for edibles, but it does impact us because we're part of this whole community, and we're working to normalize cannabis consumption. And so what this proposal does, that unfortunately passed unanimously out of committee and is now going to go for vote unless we're able to intervene, but it creates a rule that says that every edible must be individually packaged at no more than 10 milligrams per package. And that each of those 10 milligram packages, you have to be able to read all of the warnings, read the ingredients. They need to be able to stand on their own. So what that would do away with is that would completely eliminate the higher dose edibles. Like, you could now go into a dispensary and get, for example, 100 milligram edible. It would be scored or, somehow delineated in 10 milligram segments, but that would completely eliminate. All of those would have to be individually packaged. And so the impact is a financial one first, because edible manufacturers would have to retool all of their existing equipment. And these types of equipment to package it, those don't even exist. So they'd have to be developed. We're talking, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to develop equipment to comply with this rule. So there's the cost. But also there are reports from the U.S. federal government. The Consumer Product Safety Council has studied this exact issue, not for cannabis, but for other things that are not child friendly, and has determined that individual packaging does not, in fact, make children safer. So this rule is not going to do what it's proposed to do. It does not make children safer.
Responsible use by parents needs to lock away or put in containers that will keep their children away from this medicine.
That'll do it for the A block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but we have our international block coming up next, plus more state reports and more from that interview with Ohio's Tim Johnson. Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
That mentality at the State House, as far as cannabis, I don't think it's got that far, much less I don't think they can comprehend it down there, what it actually means. My whole view.
Stop your whining, Tim. Stop your whining.
Exactly. Well,
your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471c reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. While the prohibitionist movement in this country is more emboldened now, internationally, many countries are reforming their own Byzantine laws that have been around since the 15th century. Case in point, the country of Ghana in Africa. This week, that country approved a medical and industrial use licensing process. The U.S. definition of 0.3% of THC is in play in Ghana, and licensees will undergo an exhaustive approval process. The adult use of cannabis for non-medicinal purposes is still illegal in Ghana, to enunciate. One more item from Australia and New Zealand. Aurora Cannabis of Canada is expanding their reach into Australia and New Zealand. Aurora will be introducing new medicinal products in both the flower and resin categories. And one more note from Canada. Did you know that Organigram is the #1 cannabis company in that country? The publicly traded company has had quite a turnaround in just over a year. In November last year, they brought in a new CEO named James Yamanaka, who has led the resurgence. Here's our publicly traded expert, Doug Miller, with his High on Wall Street report for this week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Organigram reported first quarter fiscal 2026 revenue of $97.3 million, up 46% year over year. Net revenue jumped 49% to $63.5 million, while international sales climbed 51% to $5 million, showing continued global expansion. Even more impressive, adjusted EBITDA surged 273% to $5.3 million, reflecting improved efficiency and strong integration from the Motif acquisition. Organigram now holds the #1 market share in Canada in vapes, milled flower, and concentrates, while ranking top 3 across multiple other categories, reinforcing its dominance in the Canadian recreational market. Operational yields increased 43%, helping lower per unit production costs. The company also announced a major genetic breakthrough in powdery mildew resistance, reducing identification time from months to days, a potential long-term margin booster. Net income came in at $20 million compared to $27.5 million loss last year. The company ended the quarter with $63 million in cash, maintaining solid liquidity despite higher working capital investment. So let's see how the stock chart looks. OGI is trading around $1.29, and it's been pulling back with the market. But it looks like the market could be bottoming out here, so that'll be great for the cannabis stocks. They can start to bounce back up. So we'll be watching for that, and also watch for dips, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
You might remember how a clerical error in New York threatened the existence of 150 dispensaries in the city when it first opened. Now, Governor Kathy Hochul approved new regulations about spacing and placing dispensaries near schools and places of worship. All 150 of those dispensaries who were originally given approval and a license will be allowed to stay where they are. To make sure that this never happens again, Governor Hochul has outlined how and when those measurements must be followed in the future. At least that state came up with a reasonable solution and regulation. That's good. In Massachusetts, there was another embarrassing incident involving the leadership of the Cannabis Control Commission and their controversial executive director, Shannon O'Brien. This time, O'Brien took her fellow commissioners to task over a dispute about collecting fines from a testing lab called Assured. That lab was fined $300,000 for falsifying reports of its testing. With more drama from the Bay State, here's Curtis Emery.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It was a big news weekend here in Massachusetts as the CCC attempts to hold Executive Director Travis Ahern accountable for private and undisclosed transactions with Assured testing labs. The testing lab here in Massachusetts, which has been fined a large sum of money for untruthful, misleading, and fraudulent testing practices here in the Bay State. Assured was ordered to pay installments of $300,000 across the fall of 2025, ending last week here in February 2026. However, it was discovered on the 12th that Ahern had given them permission to only pay $100,000 on the 12th of February, with another $100,000 planned to be distributed this spring. Now, the CCC was not happy with this at all, saying that it was keeping the regulatory body from following the law and the statute to its rightful end, which would be Assured paying what they are required to pay for being a bad actor here in Massachusetts. Also in the news, the CCC is moving to cap new business licenses here in the state. Massachusetts is currently dealing with a canopy problem. That is, this market is oversaturated with product, driving down the price of product here in the state. One way the CCC is hoping to combat that downwards trend in pricing is to keep new businesses from opening in the state until old businesses can move through their stock and maybe even out the market a little bit. So it's beneficial for the customer and the businesses which do business here in the Bay State. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Despite resistance from the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, the medical marijuana program in that state continues to operate. Right now, there are only 18,168 patients with medical cards in that state, but that is up from 5,600 when it started in 2022. Considering there are just under 1 million people living in South Dakota, advocates seem pleased with that growth. Earlier in the show, we shared an interview with Tim Johnson, a longtime cannabis advocate and lobbyist in the state of Ohio. The former veteran and law enforcement officer responded to a quote from their governor, Mike DeWine, about comments made this week regarding the whining of pro-cannabis advocates in his state. While we shared Tim's thoughts about the New York Times editorial, we saved his thoughts about his governor, Mike DeWine, who called some advocates whiners who are voicing their opinions about how the legislature has changed some of the laws Ohio citizens voted in. Here's Tim Johnson with more.
I don't think you've ever whined, Tim. Is that an accurate portrayal of the pro-cannabis efforts that you have been put in place in Ohio?
I'm not whining about cannabis. There's plenty of that here. It's like chocolate in a candy store.
Yep.
What I'm whining about is the fact that the Republican Party in Ohio, again, for the third time that I'm aware of here, just in the last few years, have totally disrespected the vote and the will of the people. 2.2 million people, more people voted for cannabis in Ohio than voted for Governor DeWine. So it kind of is what it is. The truth is there. Am I whining? Yeah, I'm whining because you're disrespecting my constitutional rights. It's not because of, well, I'm whining because you criminalized cannabis and hemp in Ohio, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, I think that's the whole thing. He's never really played a big part in this. It's all been run by, the Republican leadership at the state house has controlled the cannabis growth and so forth in Ohio. He just happened to be in a position that has to sign off on stuff.
And I understand that the Attorney General, though, has approved a referendum question about some of the laws that recriminalize the plant. So that's going to get on the ballot this year, yes?
We're hoping to. Actually, that's active right now. It's no on Senate Bill 56 referendum. We have until the 19th to have around 248 valid voting signatures.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that we're going to get there. Having consulting on the side with the group that's doing that. What I have more faith in is the fact that there are several hemp companies, several independent organizations in outside of the cannabis industry, such as maybe the ACLU and so forth. And there's also cannabis license holders that will be filing lawsuits on Senate Bill 56 once it would go into effect on the 20th, which means they'd be looking for a court injunction to start stalling it. So much of that is unconstitutional. It's quite hilarious, I guess, to read some of it, and then you look at the legislators and go, "Do you have any idea what you guys are writing here?" And they don't. Most of them don't. Attorneys are not. I don't care. They don't know what they're doing.
There's always something going on in the state of Florida when it comes to cannabis. The state with the largest registered amount of patients continues to try to get an adult use question on the ballot, but came up short on the total of signatures that were due by February 1st. Smart and Safe Florida still thinks they collected more than the target amount to get a question on the ballot and is going to court to try to prove it. This week, that state's legislature actually made some progress in allowing veterans to get a price discount for a medical card, while also increasing the amount of supply any one patient can have. Now, doctors can approve 5 70-day supplies of product up from 3 and can also recommend up to 10 35-day supplies up from 6. Plus, medical card holders will have a full year to renew their cards up from 30 weeks. Over the past few months, Dina Tasaka has been pulling double duty, covering the Southwest states and keeping track of the indigenous peoples' growth in the cannabis legal era. Here's her Tribal Lands report for the week.
I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The State of the Tribes Address is an annual event broadcast by PBS Wisconsin that brings together leaders from Wisconsin's 11 federally recognized tribes to share priorities and key issues impacting Indigenous communities. The address was delivered on February 10th by Chairwoman Nicole Boyd of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. In her remarks, Chairwoman Boyd placed strong emphasis on the urgent need for medical marijuana and hemp policy advancement in Wisconsin. She underscored the role of medical cannabis in supporting patients dealing with chronic pain, seizures, PTSD, opioid recovery, and other serious health conditions. She also recognized the leadership and research efforts of the ICIA, Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, and the Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association for helping build credible pathways and evidence-based understanding around cannabis and hemp benefits. Chairwoman Boyd pointed to the momentum across the country, noting that more than 40 states have legalized some form of cannabis, and highlighted the strong economic performance of neighboring markets such as Minnesota and Michigan in what she described as a thriving, multi-billion-dollar sector, even giving a nod to Michigan-based Wild Glow Cannabis Company as an example of industry growth and innovation. She closed this portion of her speech with a clear call to action for Wisconsin leaders to move forward decisively and responsibly. Here's Chairwoman Boyd.
When it comes to tribal health care, tribal nations desire improved access to medical cannabis and hemp-derived THC in Wisconsin. Acting now to improve access is an absolute necessity. Wisconsinites are beyond ready and growing more impatient with lawmakers every day on this topic. Advocacy groups like the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association and the Wisconsin Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association continue to provide abundant evidence that Wisconsin is ready to legalize.
That's the latest for Tribal Cannabis News. I'm Tina Tasaka for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
After years of delay and changes to the laws, the Alabama medicinal program is slowly awarding some licenses to grow and sell. Jennifer Boozer Stewart is our Sweet Home Alabama reporter every week, and she hosts a radio show every Monday by that same name. Here's Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Alabama's regulated cannabis landscape took another step forward this week as state officials announced new approvals for both hemp retailers and medical cannabis providers. According to the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries, 4 new hemp retailers' licenses have been issued statewide. These licenses allow businesses to legally sell hemp-derived products that meet federal and state standards. HB 445, which shuttered businesses statewide over the last 7 months, went into full effect January 1st. However, the ABC board was not prepared to approve or issue licenses until now. The businesses who were still standing have had to remove hemp products from the shelves for the last 45 days and counting, causing untold amounts of financial loss for each one. State regulators emphasize that these licenses apply only to hemp-derived products, which remain legal under the 2018 Farm Bill and Alabama's HB 445 hemp program. The newly approved retailers are expected to begin operations immediately, expanding access to compliant products for adults across the state in spite of the fact that only one product maker has been approved to produce compliant products. No word on when other manufacturers, including out-of-state processors, will be approved to manufacture products. Meanwhile, the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission has confirmed that 5 physicians have now been certified to recommend medical cannabis to eligible patients. These doctors have completed the 4 hours of online state-required training and are authorized to issue recommendations once dispensaries officially open. Under Alabama's medical cannabis law, patients must have a qualifying condition and receive a recommendation from a certified physician before they can purchase products from a licensed dispensary. While dispensaries are not yet open, the Commission says certifying physicians ahead of time will help ensure a smoother rollout once the retail system is fully operational. Industry observers say both developments, new hemp retailers' licenses and newly certified medical cannabis physicians, signal continued progress toward a more structured and accessible marketplace for Alabama residents. State officials have not yet announced an exact opening date for medical cannabis dispensaries, but they say the infrastructure is steadily moving into place. Citizens, still reeling from the loss of hemp products they used for over 7 years, are not holding their breath after 5 years of delays on a functional medical cannabis program. Hemp was all they had, and the state ripped that away without consideration. Confidence is understandably low for the sick and suffering people of Alabama. I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Even though Colorado is one of the most mature cannabis markets in the country, they are still facing some of the challenges younger legal states face. One is the falsification of lab results. Now, regulators in Colorado are ready to make some changes about that testing process. One change would be to have independent officials pick the samples from growers rather than be handed flower by the dispensary or grower. A report in ProPublica said that that issue is under discussion. One of the deputy directors of the regulatory board there, Kyle Lampert, was quoted as saying this: "Sample adulteration is a common violation," unquote. Colorado did over $3 billion in sales in 2025. That amount is something that the state of Missouri could maybe surpass one day. Brandon Jones has this week's report from the Show Me State.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And that's right, this week we found out the Missouri's tax revenue was $255 million in 2025, which actually was 600 times the projected amount supposed to be here for the state. So now you can say why they call us the Show Me State here in Missouri. 600 times what they thought the projected numbers would be. And on another note, fun times going on here still. Lots of different events. And yes, last night here in the state of Missouri, Berner came through. He had a meet and greet at Dr. Smoke on Broadway, one of the smoke shops here that follows the 2018 Farm Bill and doesn't follow the Missouri regulations. And then he performed right next door at the warehouse on Broadway and actually allowed consumption inside during his concert. So lots of fun events. Big people like Berner and the cookies industry coming to Kansas City, and projections getting blown out of the water 600 times. So get ready for the World Cup also coming to Kansas City. Lots of big things, big events, and lots of cannabis. I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Stay medicated and educated. Have a great week.
And finally this week, since we are in the middle of the Olympics in Italy, we thought we would enlighten you about 5 gold medalists who have at least admitted they have used it in the past. Perhaps the most well-known user of cannabis is the most decorated Olympian of all, swimmer Michael Phelps. 3 months after cleaning up at the Beijing Olympics in 2009, Phelps was caught smoking a bong and was suspended for 3 months for this embarrassment. Usain Bolt from Jamaica also admitted that when he was younger in Jamaica, he used the sacred plant on his island. But did you know that an Italian snowboarder named Ross Rebelletti won a gold medal in snowboarding in 1998 in Japan? He tested positive, but was allowed to keep his medal because, get this, the IOC hadn't placed it on the banned substances list yet. By the way, the jury is still out on whether cannabis is a performance-enhancing plant or performance-worsening. Of course, it all depends on your own tolerance, and that's why we always preach the responsible adult use of cannabis. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Educate yourself and consume responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
So what's your life story? Do you define yourself by your career or by your personal journey? The trick is to tell it in under 15 seconds. Here's mine. I'm Jimmy Young, a 30-year Emmy Award-winning sportscaster from New England who's a teacher and coach in my soul. I've mentored hundreds of young people, but I'm most proud of my only child, a 35-year-old son, Gabriel, who's now a licensed electrician in North Carolina who can fix anything. How about you? If you want to build your confidence enough to walk up to a stranger at a networking event and start a conversation, sign up for my office hours with Professor Jimmy live on Monday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Now, there's a fee of $1 to hang out with me for that hour, but I'll share some tips so you can tell your life story in 15 seconds. Just log on to ProfessorJimmy.com, and guess what? I'll even give you your $1 back if you don't laugh and learn something that can help you become a better communicator.